Hello! On March 18th, 2021, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel took their power struggle to a shocking new level, shaking all of Mexico. In a park in Guadalajara, police discovered a body tightly wrapped in black plastic with multiple gunshot wounds to the head. A bloody sign pinned to the victim's chest bore the chilling message, Traitor El Cholo. El Cholo, once a close lieutenant of El Mencho, the CJNG kingpin, had dared to break away and form his own gang, directly challenging the infamous cartel. The CJNG, notorious for its relentless brutality, did not let it slide. The discovery of El Cholo's body was more than just a warning, it was a declaration. Anyone who dares to betray will meet the same fate. This was just one of countless times gangs dared to clash with Mexico's ruthless cartels. Another horrific example was the Acapulco massacre on January 8, 2011. Outside a famous shopping center, Mexican police found 15 male bodies, all brutally tortured. 14 of the victims had signs attached to them, signed by the Sinaloa cartel, led by El Chapo Guzman. The message was clear. The Sinaloa cartel had eliminated enemies standing in the way of their ambition to fully control the city and its drug routes. The South Pacific Cartel, which had emerged in 2010 as a branch of the Beltran-Leyva cartel, became the target of Sinaloa's wrath. Known for its grotesque violence, including recruiting a 12-year-old child as an executioner, this gang did not last long. Within a year, most of its members had either been arrested or killed in cold blood. The reason was simple. They dared to face one of the world's most merciless cartels. Since its founding in the late 1980s, the Sinaloa cartel, under the leadership of figures like El Chapo and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, had steadily expanded its power through bloody confrontations with rival cartels and even the Mexican government. Despite numerous arrests and drug seizures, but Sinaloa continued to thrive thanks to its sophisticated smuggling techniques, such as cross-border tunnels between the U.S. and Mexico. When El Chapo was captured for the third time after 2 bold prison escapes, the world finally began to grasp the boundless brutality of this man. In 2019, after being extradited to the U.S. for 3 years, El Chapo finally faced trial. One of the most shocking stories from the trial came from El Chapo's former bodyguard, Isaías Valdez Rios, nicknamed Memon. He recounted how El Chapo was a bloodthirsty man who never forgave any enemy, even if they had once been allies. 3 former Sinaloa cartel members, who had later switched to a rival gang, were savagely tortured by El Chapo for hours. He beat them until their bones shattered and their bodies were completely disfigured before shooting them in the head and throwing their corpses into a fire. This story is just the tip of the iceberg of the brutal violence of Mexico's cartels. In the battle for power, there is no room for weakness or betrayal. On November 18, 2023, the atmosphere in Tijuana was on the brink of exploding. A group of 6 local and state police officers hatched a reckless plan to steal a large shipment of drugs from the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most brutal cartels in the world. With unimaginable boldness, they betrayed their oath, not only becoming criminals, but deciding to take on Los Chapitos, the 3 sons of El Chapo and El Mayo Zambada, who have maintained the cartel's bloody grip on power, even with El Chapo locked in a maximum security prison in the U.S. Soon after the heist, it didn't take long for the Sinaloa cartel to figure out what had happened. Within hours, all of Tijuana was plunged into the shadow of revenge. An armed group unleashed a furious attack on the federal prosecutor's office with 30 bullets riddling the building. This was just the beginning. Not long after, a city police officer suspected of being involved in the heist was shot dead on the street. A cold, inevitable death. However, even that wasn't enough to quell the cartel's fury. On November 24th, another burst of gunfire tore through the silent air, striking the state prosecutor's office. Fortunately, no one was injured. 3 days later, death struck again. A state detective under investigation for his involvement in the heist was brutally shot inside his car while refueling. He seemed to have realized his fate just before the shooting, but all efforts to escape were futile. His car only moved a few meters before crashing into a lamppost, and he died slumped over the steering wheel. The killers fled on motorcycles, vanishing into the chaos of the night. The retaliation escalated, and not just one, but 2 other police officers were assassinated in broad daylight. One of them had refused to join the witness protection program, and the price he paid was his life. The cartel's vengeance never stops at just a few names, and Tijuana had become a bloody battleground, where every gunshot served as a reminder that no one could escape the Sinaloa cartel's retribution. This wasn't the first time the cartel clashed with the Mexican government. On October 17, 2019, the arrest of Ovidio Guzman Lopez, son of El Chapo, sparked the fury of more than 700 gunmen. They threatened to kill civilians en masse and attacked a military housing complex, forcing the government to release Ovidio just hours after his capture. The Mexican president was compelled to order his release to prevent further bloodshed. However, Ovidio's freedom didn't last long. In 2023, he was arrested again and extradited to the U.S., where he may spend the rest of his life in prison, just like his father. Though Ovidio was captured, but the Sinaloa cartel continues to operate powerfully. His two brothers, Ivan and Jesus Guzman Salazar, still run the drug empire, facing arrest warrants from both Mexico and the U.S. These chapitos not only continue their drug trafficking, but are also infamous for their cruelty in torturing their enemies. Reports from the U.S. Department of Justice reveal the brutal torture methods they use, from bottle capping, electric shocks to pouring hot chili peppers into their victims' wounds. Some unlucky ones were even fed to tigers, where it didn't matter whether they were dead or alive. Facing the cartel, whether as a cop or a farmer, always leads to a grim fate. On December 8, 2023, in Texcaltitlan, a small village southwest of Mexico City, local residents could no longer endure the cartel's terror. Desperate and frustrated, they decided to rise up, arming themselves with whatever they could find. But the biggest question wasn't how long they could fight, but how the cartel would react when confronted with this unexpected rebellion. On December 8th, the tension in the village was palpable. A fierce clash erupted after the gang decided to double the tax they demanded from the poor farmers. The villagers had barely managed to pay the initial extortion fee, but this time the cartel's demands were beyond their capacity. The previous harvest had been disastrous, leaving them nearly destitute. One desperate farmer said, "We can't survive. If we don't fight, we'll starve to death anyway." With nothing left to lose, the villagers decided to resist the cartel. They gathered, armed with whatever they could, such machetes, sticks, old hunting rifles, all preparing for a life or death battle. The meeting was set at the local soccer field, usually a place for children to play, but today it had become a battlefield. The cartel arrived armed to the teeth, even wearing fake Mexican military uniforms to intimidate. But the courage and rage of the villagers were not easily crushed, as this was a fight for their very survival, to live or to die. Chaos erupted as soon as the first shot was fired. No one knew who shot first, but both sides immediately plunged into a bloody battle. Despite their crude weapons, but the farmers did not retreat. They charged forward with all the determination they could muster to face the ruthless criminals. The battle didn't last long, but it was enough to turn the soccer field into a sea of blood. When the gunfire subsided, a total of 14 people had fallen, including 4 farmers and 10 cartel members. Among the dead was Comandante Payaso, the brutal leader of La Familia Michoacana in the area, who had ordered the increase in extortion fees. When he fell, the remaining cartel members fled in fear, leaving behind their trucks and the bodies of their comrades, which the villagers did not hesitate to burn on the spot. Though victorious, but sorrow still enveloped the village. One resident said in frustration, "We called for help from the Mexican military. We knew this was going to happen, but no one came. We were abandoned." Their cries for help had been ignored, and the government had failed to protect them. This confrontation quickly captured public attention, especially with the presidential election approaching. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador blamed the situation on the growing drug consumption and argued that previous administrations had failed to take care of the youth. Meanwhile, candidate Xochitl Gálvez harshly criticized Obrador's hugs instead of bullets strategy, saying it left citizens like those in Texcaltitlan feeling abandoned. She stated, "The hugs are for criminals while the bullets are for the people." Regardless, the government decided not to prosecute the farmers involved in the clash, deeming it a legitimate act of self-defense. The village briefly felt relieved, but the terror soon returned. On December 27th, La Familia Michoacana retaliated by attacking the village at night. kidnapping 14 people, including police officers who were captured at a checkpoint and a wounded villager from the previous clash. Then on January 16, 2024, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Police received an anonymous call directing them to a chapel in San Miguel Zinacantepec, where they found 7 of the 14 kidnapped victims. These included 3 women and 4 children, who were discovered in surprisingly good condition, sitting quietly and waiting for the police to rescue them. What had truly happened to the others? And why did the rescued victims know nothing about where they had been held? The biggest question remained. Were the missing still alive, or had they met a gruesome fate for daring to stand up to the cartel? On January 11th, 2020, Kum Yepez Ortiz walked down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness, unaware that her special day was about to turn into the worst nightmare she could imagine. As she stood beside her husband, the notorious drug lord El Cholo, the two exchanged vows in joy. But suddenly a group of armed men stormed into the church, turning the festive atmosphere into sheer panic. Gunshots echoed through the once peaceful space. The chaos sent everyone into a frenzy, and a bullet struck Kum, causing her to collapse in pain before the stunned eyes of the guests. Meanwhile, the groom was kidnapped by the assailants on the spot, leaving the crowd in disarray. But the situation was far worse than it seemed, as Kum was not only the wife of a drug lord, but also the sister of a notorious cartel leader. Her family had a long-standing feud with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. Though CJNG had only been established recently, it quickly rose to become one of the most brutal and influential gangs in Mexico. The Mexican government considered it one of the most dangerous organizations, second only to the Sinaloa cartel. The U.S. Department of Justice has also listed CJNG as one of the 5 most dangerous transnational criminal organizations in the world, responsible for countless deaths both in Mexico and at the U.S. border, all from their bloody hands. CJNG began in 2009 as an offshoot of the Milenio gang and quickly evolved into the most dangerous cartel. Its leader, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, also known as El Mencho, was once a police officer in Jalisco. His brutality wasn't just a means to an end, it was a twisted pleasure. This mentality permeated the entire organization, with CJNG spreading terror through acts of horrific violence such as massacres, acid baths, beheadings, and even cannibalism to train new assassins. One horrifying example occurred during rush hour in Veracruz, where 35 tortured and bound bodies were dumped on the streets as a warning to those who dared oppose them. In another brutal act, they killed a man and his son by strapping explosives to their bodies and blowing them up, filming the gruesome scene and laughing as they watched their victims' terrifying end. Kum's brother, Jose Antonio Yepez Ortiz, also known as El Maro, was the leader of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, notorious for stealing fuel from pipelines in Guanajuato. A bloody war erupted between CJNG and Santa Rosa de Lima when a banner appeared in Guanajuato threatening the president of Mexico to withdraw security forces from the state, or there would be more bloodshed. El Maro quickly denied involvement, but El Mencho refused to believe him and was determined to destroy El Maro's gang. To carry out this goal, CJNG planned a massacre at Kum's wedding. And though the slaughter occurred amidst panic, but El Maro managed to escape without a trace, leaving his sister lying in a pool of blood. The grief and fury he must have felt were unimaginable. But El Maro couldn't hide forever. On August 2nd, 2020, he was captured in a joint operation between the Guanajuato government and Mexico's Public Security Department. Many believed the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel had been crushed, but subsequent events proved otherwise. The war had never truly ended, and ghosts from the past continued to haunt, igniting a storm of unprecedented violence in Mexico's cartel history. In January 2024, a shocking photo emerged circulating across Mexico, revealing a woman believed to be the current leader of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. She was suspected of orchestrating a series of massacres and attacks late last year in Guanajuato. From the armed assault on police that killed 2 officers to a firefight that claimed the lives of firefighters, and most notably the massacre at a festival in Salvadera, where 11 people were killed and 12 others injured. The most shocking detail? This woman was none other than Kum Elizabeth Yepez Ortiz. Rumors swirled with suspicion. How could this be? Some speculated she had faked her death to escape CJNG, waiting for the right time to gather enough strength for revenge. Others pointed out that authorities had never officially confirmed her death at the wedding. The sense of mystery deepened as officials remained silent, creating an atmosphere of tension. Whoever this woman truly was, it was clear she had stepped into a deadly war with CJNG, and the outcome was likely to be brutal, for CJNG neither forgives nor forgets. The following story serves as a chilling reminder of this truth. On March 18th, 2021, Mexican police discovered a horrifying scene. A body wrapped tightly in black trash bags abandoned in a park in Guadalajara. At first, the police thought it was just a dummy because the body was wrapped so tightly, but after closer inspection, they suspected it was none other than Carlos Enrique Sanchez Martinez, a notorious gangster in Mexico. How did they know? Next to the body were two handwritten signs, stabbed into the corpse with kitchen knives, bearing the chilling words, El Cholo, Sanchez Martinez's infamous nickname. He had once been a loyal member of CJNG, even rumored to be El Mencho's right-hand man. However, driven by ambition and greed, El Cholo made the biggest mistake of his life, betraying CJNG. He was accused of ordering the murder of Marcos Hernandez, also known as El Colombiano, a key financial figure for CJNG. After El Colombiano discovered El Cholo's shady dealings and reported them to El Mencho, things quickly escalated. Soon after, El Cholo created his own gang, Nueva Plaza, with backing from CJNG's biggest enemy, the Sinaloa cartel. These two groups launched bloody battles for control of territories. Now the question remains, if you were once part of CJNG and witnessed its brutality firsthand, would you dare stand against them? I can't imagine doing so, but El Cholo did, and he paid a steep price for his decision. On March 18th, 2021, a haunting video surfaced online showing a man in a red lacrosse shirt, sitting in a chair, looking defeated and resigned to his fate. Behind him stood a group of masked men armed and ready for what was about to happen. The man, later identified as El Cholo, began speaking as if reading from a script. He took responsibility for numerous crimes across Mexico, including an attack on the U.S. consulate. Not only did he openly admit his wrongdoings, but he also implicated several high-ranking police officers, claiming they had collaborated with him in attempts to bring down CJNG. One of the most notable names he mentioned was Omar Garcia Harfuca, a well-known officer famous for his tough tactics and unrelenting resolve in the fight against criminal gangs. The truth and the death lurking behind El Cholo's words seemed like a sentence waiting to be carried out. A chilling lesson in the brutality and betrayal of the criminal underworld, where there is no place for forgiveness. In June 2020, a violent attack nearly cost Harfuca his life. He was severely wounded, and the price he paid was even steeper as two of his close friends were killed in the brutal assault. This only fueled his hatred for CJNG, igniting a determination in him that the nation must continue its relentless battle against these cowardly criminal organizations. Shortly after the attack, the Attorney General of Mexico City arrested at least a dozen suspects tied to CJNG, but El Mencho's name remained elusive, safe and out of reach. This fueled Harfuca's anger and his drive for revenge. He knew the fight couldn't end until those behind El Cholo's actions paid for their crimes. As the video of El Cholo's frail, fear-stricken confession spread online, Harfuca immediately denied all accusations. He didn't bother with the words of a criminal being held captive by other criminals, and it seemed he knew for certain that those behind El Cholo were none other than CJNG. The cold and determined look in his eyes showed an unwavering confidence. In the video, El Cholo nearly broke down in tears, urging his fellow gang members to abandon the fight and spend more time with their families. With sorrowful eyes, he ended the video with a desperate lament. "Look at me. See how I've ended up?" These words seemed to foreshadow the tragic fate that awaited him. Not long after the video went viral, El Cholo's mutilated body was found tightly wrapped in plastic and placed on a park bench, creating a horrifying scene. He had been shot multiple times in the head, and clear signs of brutal torture were visible on his body before the final bullet ended his suffering. A blood-soaked sign on his chest read, "El Cholo, the traitor." This message served as a chilling warning to anyone who dared to stand against the cruelty of CJNG, a ruthless punishment for those who betrayed them.
The illegal synthetic drug market is booming, and it's no longer just the familiar prescription painkillers we once knew. During the pandemic, over 100,000 lives have been lost due to these drugs. They not only bring death, but also inflict immense suffering on millions of American families. In particular, the fentanyl overdoses, a deadly drug driving the nationwide opioid crisis, are being dubbed the new pandemic. What's even more terrifying is that the masterminds behind this crisis are no longer giant pharmaceutical companies, but ruthless Mexican drug gangs and criminal organizations. The game has completely changed with the emergence of synthetic drugs. What has driven these criminal organizations to plunge into the production and consumption of these drugs so frenetically? Everything now resembles a chaotic, lawless, free market economy. The notorious Mexican drug cartels are adapting, but what does the future hold for them in this volatile world? An undeniable advantage they have is that spreading violence at the local level is enough to dominate the market. In Mexico, a remote area in Sinaloa has become a paradise for illegal fentanyl production. There, two men are quietly cooking up this deadly drug. Fentanyl, an opioid consumed by millions of Americans across the border, is not difficult to produce if you know the formula. This is why producing this drug has become a gold rush for criminal organizations. The explosion in fentanyl production has led to the third wave of the opioid crisis in the U.S., with increasing demand in both Mexico and the U.S. Fentanyl was legally prescribed in the U.S. since the 1960s as an anesthetic, but now its illegal production and consumption mark a new dark chapter. The opioid crisis has ravaged the U.S. for over 2 decades, and many analysts believe it has now entered its third stage. The first stage started with prescription drugs, especially OxyContin, creating millions of American addicts. When the DEA and the U.S. government realized the severity of the problem, they began tightening regulations and controls. However, this actually paved the way for a shift toward heroin. The market soon recognized that fentanyl was the real gold mine, with profit margins far exceeding those of heroin. In 2021, U.S. Customs seized 5 tons of fentanyl, double the amount from the previous year. While this number may seem small, but the impact of fentanyl is enormous, just a small amount can have effects similar to tons of heroin. Compared to 50 tons of heroin, just 1 ton of fentanyl can cause a storm in the drug market. Producing fentanyl is no longer foreign to Mexican cartels. Previously, they primarily grew and trafficked heroin, marijuana, and cocaine, but they have swiftly shifted focus to synthetic drugs like fentanyl. These drugs do not require farms or extensive manpower, but offer huge profits with production costs extremely low, just 1% of those for heroin. The drug war is becoming increasingly brutal, and Mexican cartels are methodically taking control by creating deadly fentanyl nightmares, trapping millions in a cycle of addiction and despair. The precursor chemicals needed to produce fentanyl are incredibly cheap. You only need to spend a few $1,000s to buy the raw materials, but then you can make millions from selling the drug. Huge profits make this industry exceptionally dangerous. Although people often talk about fentanyl labs, but the reality is that the production process is extremely rudimentary, requiring neither advanced equipment nor specialized training. With just a mobile lab and 2 people, you can produce a kilogram of fentanyl in a single day. This has turned the synthetic drug market into a completely new game. These labs can be set up anywhere, without needing to be near opium-growing regions. All you need is some basic knowledge of chemistry and a disregard for human life to dive into producing this deadly poison. The globalized market is facilitating the production of illegal synthetic drugs, with the supply chain for synthetic drugs now resembling that of legal products. Fentanyl producers turn to China for precursor chemicals, just as legitimate businesses source their raw materials from this country. Taking advantage of the vast scale of global trade, smugglers easily funnel these precursor chemicals into Mexico through major ports like Manzanillo, Colima, Lázaro Cárdenas, and Veracruz, places notorious for corruption. At these ports, identifying precursor chemicals to prevent smuggling is a challenging task. Facing codes like a 476321B, pinpointing exactly what to look for to shut down drug labs becomes incredibly complex. Although China has tightened control over fentanyl production centers, but controlling the precursors remains inadequate. The shift of fentanyl production from China to Mexico is occurring at an alarming rate. For those directly cooking fentanyl, the risks are not only of arrest, but also of severe health impacts. Many have died from inhaling and coming into contact with the toxic chemicals used in production. Like workers in legal industries, they accept life-threatening risks for the promise of high wages. While the average wage in Mexico is just over $23 a day, those making fentanyl can earn up to $100 a day, a staggering amount for many. So why are drug cartels shifting from cocaine to fentanyl? It's because Mexico's notorious drug cartels, like large corporations, have adeptly adjusted their strategies as traditional income sources have been impacted. The legalization of cannabis in 18 states in the U.S. has deprived the cartels of billions in revenue. To compensate for this loss, synthetic drugs like fentanyl have become their savior, and they are profiting greatly from it. From 2015 to 2019, the amount of cannabis seized in the U.S. dropped significantly, reflecting a decrease in black market production in Mexico. By 2021, for the first time in history, the amount of synthetic drugs seized surpassed both cocaine and heroin. Changes in consumer demand in wealthy countries have profoundly influenced what is produced in developing countries. Growing demand for synthetic drugs in the U.S. has driven the supply chains from China and Mexico to flourish. In Sinaloa, a drug producer claims that converting fentanyl into pill form is the most profitable method. With minimal manpower, they can produce in bulk to meet the insatiable drug cravings of this massive market. Why are fentanyl pills so popular? It's because these pills are not just drugs, but strategic weapons for drug cartels. They are easy to distribute, sold through secret orders on the dark web, or smuggled across borders into the U.S. Brand building and clever marketing have become the refined art of synthetic drug producers, who have demonstrated their expertise in this field. Transforming fentanyl into pill form has significantly increased its appeal to consumers in the U.S. These pills are designed to closely resemble prescription painkillers, almost identical to the pain medications from pharmaceutical companies during the early days of the opioid crisis. This makes them more acceptable to the American middle class, especially compared to heroin, a drug considered dirty and socially unacceptable. The opioid crisis in the U.S. has led to a dramatic decline in heroin use, particularly in injectable forms. Heroin is now seen as a dirty drug, which has driven the rise in the use of pill-based drugs. This shift not only reflects a change in consumer preferences, but also mirrors a strong trend in the drug market. The synthetic drug business has become a revolution, not only in terms of innovative sales techniques, but also in business models. Mexican drug cartels have transitioned from large organizations, akin to giant retail chains like Walmart, to a more decentralized form of business. The large cartels have fragmented, and synthetic drug production increasingly relies on independent contractors rather than traditional cartel members. The global contract economy has infiltrated the black market, creating a distributed and decentralized system. Fentanyl production has democratized the drug market in Mexico, disrupting the power structures of traditional criminal organizations. In the past, there were about 8 major criminal syndicates, but now only 2 large organizations maintain such scale. Currently, around 200 smaller armed groups are active. These groups are more agile, diversified in their criminal activities, and seek easier profits. Many of these gangs can no longer engage in large-scale drug trafficking, but still participate in other criminal activities such as extortion, theft, and kidnapping for ransom. Their sources of income are now far more varied than 25 years ago. From kidnapping for ransom, human trafficking, to fuel theft and extortion of avocado farmers, this trend of diversification seems likely to continue. Industries worth billions like the avocado industry offer huge profit opportunities for these criminal groups, with the notable advantage being that they only need to maintain local violence to reap the benefits. The multi-headed business model allows criminal groups to reap enormous profits through a distributed and decentralized structure. Over the past decade, Mexican criminal organizations have truly become multi-industry entrepreneurs, and their networks have evolved into monstrous entities, causing severe instability in the country. What do you think of this story? Leave your thoughts in the comments below so everyone can see. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.